I'll concede your point just for brevity, but
What? Brevity? We don't do that around here. It's probably
No.
Citrus, or what is a Capital One Bowl? It used to be Citrus Bowl, right?
oh my
Capital
God,
One.
dude, where have you been?
I just like the real name.
It hasn't been the Citrus Bowl since like what 2002?
What was your highlight side dish from Thanksgiving?
Oh gosh, Scotch.
This is the Buck Around, the podcast devoted to all things Wisconsin Badger football from a fan perspective. Featuring your hosts, Richard Branch and Maxwell Brusky.
And hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Buck Around. Welcome back to episode 305 of said Buck Around. I am one half of the Buck Around. Oh, I put said in the wrong place. Richard Branch, joined, as always, which may not be a term I can use in a couple weeks, but we'll get to that at the end, by my anticipatory colleague, Maxwell Brusky.
Like
How
it.
are you, sir?
I'm good.
Yeah?
Good. Yeah.
Well, I am... You know why you're anticipatory? Because I can't speak today for some reason. It's that, you know what, I can't speak because I'm stressed out. And it's, I guess I'm the anticipatory one. I just printed out our agenda right before we hit the red button. So you know what that means? There is a very high probability that Toner Bortolotti, my beloved printer, is going to make an appearance in today's podcast.
True. Oh boy.
Because it does
Got
like
him
to...
going.
Yeah, it does like to sort of make its presence known if you print with it, because I don't know. It's a mysterious machine over there. She's a, wily gal, if I can say that. I don't know.
Old Toner.
Yeah, Toner is
Old Toner.
is a many mysteried machine.
I thought you were going to say you were stressed for the 15 inches of snow you just got.
Oh, well, you know what? I was just south of the band. Thank you for
You
bringing
were.
that up.
Okay. Yeah.
Apologies to everyone. We're a day late this week. We had a snow day in my region of the world yesterday, and trying to record that, it just would have been too much with everything going on. So Max was gracious enough to push off for me until Wednesday here. But yeah, no, we were more in like the 9 to 10 inch range. And
Okay.
unfortunately, it's cold again today, so it's not really going anywhere. Driving around today was like dodging icebergs coming off of everyone's roof of their car, because
Sure.
it was warm yesterday, so it melted a little bit. Like it got up to like 40 and then got cold again, and so then they just turned into balls of ice. And
Yep.
I was ahead of the game. I cleaned it off yesterday, so I'm
that's
looking
good.
down my nose at everyone else. Good
The
weather.
ones
talk.
off the roof and the ones off the fender. Well, I was going to say it was your classic nor'easter setup, wasn't it?
Indeed, I believe they called it a clipper this time. Which
Oh, really?
yeah, I don't know if it was a nor'easter because I don't know if you had the two, but it doesn't matter to me. It was mostly out over the water. That was after all the big talk. So
That's what my normie news told me today. The 1440 email I get. I don't know if you.
Oh, so they said it was a nor'easter?
They did, and then they gave you links to what a nor'easter is. Kind of explain
Wow.
the setup. Because I'm pretty familiar with the setup. I haven't lived through one personally.
Well, you have to be in the northeast.
Right. Well, I've never been in the northeast during one of those classic
Exactly.
nor'easter setups. So.
Yeah. We just call them snowstorms. But people say nor'easter, and then
Yeah.
everyone gets nervous, and you're like, what's a nor'easter? And people just go, and they don't know. So they just kind of just say, it's a storm that isn't pleasant. So
Well, if they would have gone to the 1440 today, or
I know, they could have
40
learned.
email, they could have been a little more informed.
All right, fair enough. So should we get into these Badgers? I know people want more weather talk, but we should talk a little bit about the Badgers.
Non-playing portion of the season.
We are in the non-playing portion of the season. We're going to stick with that term.
And I think we can have a nice segue from weather into Kamoe Latu, who has now gotten used to winters.
He has.
And, and he's somebody who did not grow up with winter.
And apparently is hanging around Madison for another one. I think that's
Right.
sort of like can we say an under the radar piece of news? Because he was a guy that theoretically had exhausted eligibility.
I thought he did.
Well, he had a COVID year, but
Mhm.
generally speaking, when guys have been exercising that COVID year, you sort of hear something about it. And on that I've had my little scholarship tracker going that if you follow us on the Twitter, you've seen me post every once in a while. That's my little spreadsheet. And I've had Kamoi Latu sitting there under the grad availability spot with guys like Isaac Townsend and Gio Paez and Cam Large. And I kind of figured he was like those other three who I do not think are coming back, though we haven't seen anything official.
Didn't Cam Large say he was done?
I mean,
he did.
I don't know if he did. If he did, I missed it.
Like in a retired from football kind of.
That was more what I'm assuming.
I thought that happened already, but maybe not.
I mean, I thought it happened in September when I saw him in street clothes and headset.
Right.
Like he just looked like a dude who understood he wasn't good. And I don't mean that like in a snarky way. I mean legitimately just looked like a guy who was done with football. But so anyways, we never heard anything about Latu, and I kind of figured he just disappeared off into the suite there, hereafter. But then we saw him on the Dudes of the Week stuff and that kind of thing that Brady Collins puts out. So he is back. He is a safety for the Badgers for 2024. My question for you, sir, were you surprised by that? And what does it mean to you?
He was interesting. I mean, 2022, it looked like he really kind of came on. And I don't know that we weren't talking, we weren't doing the show then, but I never saw him as a skill guy, just more of a really hard hitter.
We both, I think, called him like
athletic.
Yes. We were like big, instinctual, excited to see him play kind of guy. Both of us said that, right?
Yeah. And I think for the Badgers, though, he's gone through an evolution. I mean, he started those first couple games, or, was getting a lot of playing time, then went down and then came back. The last couple of games, he played a lot. So, maybe he's learning how to fit in with what they want to do. And I don't know. I think it's an interesting opportunity. I think you and I might have talked about this before, but maybe it was prior to the bowl game. I'm trying to think of when it was, but if he wanted to go to the NFL, I think he would have some success as a special teams player.
Yeah, I think you did mention something to that effect.
Yeah. And I feel like he could do that. I don't think he could play safety, or at least in a traditional free strong, in the traditional way that you play it. Maybe you find room for him because he's athletic and he can hit. But I wouldn't have been surprised if that's what he wanted to do. Am I that surprised that he's coming back? I just didn't realize he had any more eligibility.
All right,
that was probably the most surprising thing for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to me because I was thinking about him when we were prepping for the show. Do you know what game he played the most snaps this year, or this past season, I should say?
I would guess it would have been one of the first two.
It was the first one. You're right. It was Buffalo. He played 59 snaps. Do you know what game he
59,
played?
59. Wow.
After that, he played one game with 50 snaps. Do you know what game that was? You have a guess?
Was it Minnesota or the bowl game again?
It was LSU. Wow, good, Max. He played 59 snaps in the first game. He played 50 in the last game against LSU. He played 43 against Georgia Southern, which was the third game. And then basically after that, it dropped. Like Minnesota, he only played 6 snaps. Nebraska, he played 7. Ohio State, he played 15. Illinois, he has a little pip up at 34, but Iowa 17. Like it was just a reverse bell curve for him.
Well, I think it wasn't Illinois when they were Zachman hurt or something like that. I think there was a reason for that, as I recall.
So it was really interesting to me how he's a guy who sort of, I guess you could say to a certain degree, sort of like fought his way back in. I was surprised that he came back just because I don't think he looked particularly comfortable in their defense. Didn't seem to be able to understand his role. And because he basically played himself off the field. I think they had much higher expectations for him than what he delivered on the field initially. And, then more or less, took him out, and then he earned his way back. I guess the interesting thing to me, or I guess what it means to me, is I was a little surprised that they wanted him, in a sense, because I feel like Austin Brown is ahead of him in the pecking order now. And he's kind of like neck and neck with Preston Zachman in my mind. He's a better athlete than Zachman, but Zachman seems better schematically, just in terms of understanding his role and where to be.
Right.
So I think in their minds, they're kind of close to a wash.
Yeah.
But what kind of surprises me is it makes me think that I guess we're not going to see much of Braden Moore or Owen Arnett. I mean, Justin Taylor, not Owen Arnett. Owen Arnett would be like the next man in after them, I would have assumed. But I guess it gives me pause on the younger guys behind him that they're not ready to put one of those guys in for a dozen snaps a game. Like they don't think they're going to be there. So I guess maybe a bit of a downer in my head with that kind of result. Like, oh, not, like he is not. In my mind, I feel like he's being brought back not as a luxury, but more as a necessity. So,
Interesting.
not
Yeah,
a
really?
knock on the guy. I
No,
just,
no, 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 no. But you see it that way. That's yeah.
well, I do. I mean, you're going to have
Yeah.
4 scholarship guys who are older at the top of this thing. You got your best
Yeah.
player in the defense in Hunter Wohler. You got Austin Brown, who I think is emerging.
No doubt.
And then you had Zachman, who is sort of Zachman is like he's like Leo Musso or Peniel Jean type player where they're not like a great athlete, but they seem to understand where to be on the field. And,
Right.
They're going to get beat here and there just because of the physical limitations, but they understand their role in the defense.
Yeah.
And, with those top 3, you would then assume, oh, okay, well then, either Braden Moore or Justin Taylor is going to be in enough of a spot in year 2 to be able to be sprinkled in a dozen times.
Sure.
Because what are the snaps, right? Like there's 4 guys there. How are those snaps distributed? And to me, it's like Hunter Wohler's there is going to be an every down guy. Austin Brown is going to be a 50 snap a game guy, right? So I mean,
so
what's going to be left there?
Well, and that's why I would consider him more of a luxury.
Luxury or an insurance policy, I guess. But I mean, you're saying that he's going to be better than those young guys, which is just kind of a bummer to me. Or maybe he's not, but that's the way.
And I was going to say, I don't know if you can draw that conclusion yet, but I can see how the facts suggest that.
Yeah,
certainly.
You
there
can
take that.
There are snaps.
I don't think that's conclusive though.
Yeah, I mean, there's snaps for 3 safeties, right? So
definitely there are snaps for 3 and probably 4.
So maybe he's gonna be. I mean, maybe it's just they've seen enough of him growing at the end of the year. They're gonna get more. Maybe that's the positive spin. But
depending on what they want to do with Wohler too, because Wohler's got some flexibility too.
Yeah, but he's the only guy that's come back that I was like, I'm kind of surprised by it. Like, what is he gonna be doing? But yeah, that's really the only thing of note on the personnel front that I've seen from the weightlifting stuff, other than like guys you haven't seen. Like I noticed Mike Jarvis was a dude of the week, and you're like, oh wow, he's still there. Like maybe he'll stay healthy and you'll see him.
There was that, and I think the speedster list was pretty interesting.
Which one in particular?
Just to see the names on there.
I was going to say, okay?
Nate White's one.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is, and it's escaping me right now. Who is the top of the list? Who was it?
I think it was Tretch on one of them. They've done a couple of them. But
Tretch, yeah, I thought that was kind of fascinating.
Yeah, there was one guy who
that's
finished.
Not the person I'm thinking of, though.
Was it a guy who finished 3rd? Because there's a guy who finished 3rd that played quarterback.
No,
because Van Dyke finished 3rd on the list 1 week.
No, I didn't see that.
I was really? Like, really? Fascinating.
Oh my God, I didn't even see that.
Because he sure doesn't look that fast when I watched his play.
Yeah, he looked more like Tom Brady.
I mean, better than that, but not quite the comfort level to accelerate north of 20 miles an hour.
Sure.
But yeah, the rest of those, they're all within like 0.2 of a mile of each other, a mile per hour of each other. So I'm kind of like, okay, maybe that's like a guy got a good start. But
there's that, but I think more of it was just there were names that have been percolating in the background that were on the list.
Agreed.
Like, oh, they're still here. They're still part of things.
Yeah. It's designed to intrigue.
Yeah. I think, and I think you raise a good point. That I think that was. I don't know if it's intentional that way, but it certainly works that way.
Yeah.
That way when you see those names.
Yeah.
But no, I didn't even notice the Tyler Van Dyke thing in there. That's funny.
So should we move to the new coaches? Because the Badgers introduced 3 new coaches this past week and have an impending departure, which we'll get to next. But the red carpet, I don't know if that's not the right term, but there was the PR rollout this past week of Alex Grinch, AJ Blazek, and Blazek, I think. No, it's Blazek. You don't say
I
Blase.
think it is
It's
Blazek.
Blazek.
Yeah.
I heard him do the thing. And Kenny Guyton. Did anything interest you, intrigue you about any of these?
I think one of the cool things is these seem to be more of like national names, I guess. They're all, Power Five
Yeah.
guys. And Grinch been pretty high profile for the last 5 or 6 years. I think some of the reaction was how strange USC was, and I don't know how much can you take from that. I don't know. I guess you can take what you want. That he was looking for a new job, but he didn't have that problem at Oklahoma with Lincoln Riley, right?
He never had superstar defenses.
No, and
But
a lot of that was those offenses were also talented, including Ohio State, right?
mm-hmm.
Where the defenses weren't an afterthought, but there wasn't any kind of parity between the impactfulness or impact on the game that there was with those particular offenses. But Oklahoma did have one of the better defenses that they've had under him in recent times. So I don't know. I think it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah,
I mean, just because they're all national names, especially Grinch.
Yeah, the Grinch one it's kind of funny to call it the Grinch one.
Yeah.
But the response to Alex Grinch kind of puzzled me. I'll be totally honest. Like I get it.
Yeah,
It was like,
me too. Me too.
bad. He got fired and he's had some bad defenses. And I'm like, that was at the coordinator level, number one. And it was kind of funny because in his media availability, he was clearly annoyed that he was getting asked questions like, what? Sort of like, your defenses
Really?
were bad and you got fired. Like, was it hard to find a job? And he's like, you can tell he's
Do you
kind of
know anything
annoyed.
about college football?
It's like, how dare you? So it was kind of funny to watch because he felt that way. But my opinion, I don't know if you're an assistant guy, and I'm putting that in quotes, like someone who's really keyed in on, you need to get top tier, position coaches, and, losing Colin Hitchler was a major loss. Like, I kind of feel like this is he's as good as a fit you're going to get to replace that, because
Hell yeah.
he is a very much recruiting forward guy, which was Hitchler's strength. And I mean, he was on the upper echelon of DCs in terms of profile, like you said. So maybe he's sort of Peter principled, and you're getting him as a position coach. I do think it's interesting. Fickle made this statement in his media availability this week, and it's been brought up a couple times. It's like Mike Tressell's calling the plays,
Right.
I think Fickle's words were titles are titles. He kind of, he said, I think Mike Tressel's the defensive coordinator and titles are titles, I believe is the phrase he used in his availability to make it. I do think there is a sensitivity there to the reception that the hire got. Again, going back to their very online ways, that's what they are. But like, I can't knock this one. Like, what he reminds me of at this point is, well, three things. One, to that high profile coordinator guy, he feels like if you got Jim Chaney as your quarterbacks coach back in the day, or Kevin Steele to coach defensive backs, you'd be like, oh, that's a guy who's had some successes, had some failures, but like is a very high profile guy. Like, I don't think you can get upset like if you ever got Jim Chaney or Kevin Steele to be a part of a staff.
Yep.
And he very much feels like that. And honestly, this is the one I don't get. Like, people, this parallel hasn't been drawn, but he is almost a carbon copy of Justin Wilcox coming in 2017.
Yeah, probably true.
He was fired from USC as defensive coordinator. He had been a defensive coordinator at Washington and had been good and not great. Followed Sark to USC. Sark gets fired. He hangs around. He gets fired, caught in the shrapnel. Came in, was very effective. I don't think anybody was upset after Justin Wilcox spent a year in Madison. He was a one-year rental guy. So. Right. I mean, the reality is Grinch is a 1 or 2 year guy. Sure. And that's fine. That's what he's going to be. It's the nature of the beast.
And he may well go the Wilcox route.
Yeah.
Well, a head coaching job somewhere too.
I think he's got to be a full-on DC before. And so, like, I don't want to be, I don't know why I feel like I'm being an Alex Grinch apologist. I'm not. I'm just not getting the Like, I'm not like saying you should be excited. I'm just saying I get it. And
You feel that way because of the general reaction,
yeah,
like forces you to feel that way. I think.
yeah. But I do think it's interesting. I think the Blazek hire is really interesting because that
Yeah, me
dude,
too.
of the three of them,
Mhm.
that's your dude. You're like, wow, there's a lot of personality coming out of that guy. Like that guy, without a doubt, just in terms of what he did in his media availabilities, in the interview he did with Tauscher, like he's a dude who can talk. Like you're like, oh, I get why Fickle grabbed him. But I mean, he was very actually of the three of them. I think gave you the most about like what's he going to be like. He's like, it's gonna be an 8-man offensive line, but not the way that it was talked about before, where guys are gonna rotate in. It's like, no, I'm gonna have a starting 5. No more talk of playing 8 or 9, which they never did anyways. I'm gonna have 5 and then swing guard, swing tackle, and a center. So like 3 backups. So it's like a basketball team. You need your 8 guys for a rotation, and the rest of the bench don't worry about as much. He also has never been more. He was like, I think at one of those lower levels, he was an offensive coordinator, but since he's moved up FCS and higher, he's always just been he's been a position coach. So I'm curious to see if this is to leapfrog to something bigger for him or what. And I'm assuming, was a Fickle pick. Like, I think it's what he's interested. The interesting thing about him to me is that I think it plays into the Fickle Longo dynamic of, I mean, McNell is pushed out, is still to be determined, as Fickle said this week in the media availability. Maybe he has a role, but this feels like Fickle going to find his guy, because Longo's guy got fired. We talked about this before when we talked about it, and when we were talking about when they announced McNell getting the boot. This feels much more like a guy that is a little more attuned to how Fickle wants to marry Big Ten stuff, because he just has much more of a Fickle feel to me than a Longo feel to me. Although maybe there's a little meeting halfway, because I figured out the only connection I can find to the current staff with Blazek is that he worked under this guy Ted Schlafke, who was a quarterback who played for Longo. He's the currently offensive coordinator at one of the Dakotas, I forget which, but he played for Longo at Minnesota Duluth.
Huh.
But I don't think he and Longo knew. He said,
That's
Phil,
pretty attenuated, Rich.
Yeah, it's really that's the only thing I can find that connects him to anything. And so the only thing I do think is interesting is that for Fickle, he went outside his circle, which I think you kind of need to do sometimes. Like, it's good to have a circle, but also being able to reach out and grab a dude says good things. You're not, it always gets dogged on, but you're not putting Al Johnson in as a running back coach because you've run out of options.
Of dudes in your circle.
Yeah,
right.
So he's able to sort of refresh that outside. And I think that's a good thing to have a mix of. So we'll see what happens with him, but interesting dude.
I think one of the funnier things about it, too, is that there was a joke a couple of years ago that in order to play offensive line at Wisconsin, you have to have a Z in your name.
Well,
he's got that.
He fits. I mean, he looks.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he kind of does look like a Wisconsin. I mean, he played at Iowa.
Yeah.
So
it's Wisconsin, Iowa. I should have. I'll have to go find the Tauscher thing, because they would have been Big Ten linemen.
They were
at the same time.
No, they were talking about how they were on the opposite side of the field.
Yeah.
During the Dane game,
the late
game.
90s.
Yeah.
Oh, during the Dane game.
Yeah, he didn't play in that one, but he was on the. Sure. He was like, I was on the sidelines. And the only other one that it's like Kenny Guyton. I mean, there wasn't. I'll be honest, he's not exactly the most exciting interview and doesn't give a whole lot. Young guy.
I don't think there's much to say there.
Yeah. There to recruit. The only thing that I think was interesting is no more talk of 9 guys. He's like, if I only have 5, I'm only gonna play 5. Like, there wasn't.
Sure.
I think that was the reality last year. They just didn't say that. And they liked the way those comments, I think, were received on some level. Because again, these coaches the staff is very online. So they liked communicating that idea that we need 9 guys. And then they didn't have 9 guys, so they didn't really play 9 guys.
Right.
And nothing else really came from him. We'll see. Like, I don't feel like he's any worse than anything they've had before. Young and energy, and he needs that on his staff. A guy who's going to travel and go.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and the recruiting, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I mean,
I think it's probably the most important aspect, because Longo's running the offense. Like, it all comes from him anyway. And just from having seen, what that looks like on the sideline, up really, really close at the Purdue game, Longo was over by the quarterbacks and the receivers all the time.
I feel like with all three of them,
Mm.
it's a very, how would I describe it? Like, it is a very recruiting forward group of
Yeah.
coaches that they hired. Like,
Right.
they got to be able to do that. And they all seem clued into that concept.
And Guyton's been in the big time, you know? I
Yeah.
mean, in Arkansas too, it's still a freaking SEC West, you know? I mean,
Oh, 100%.
that's the big time.
Yeah. No, he's fighting there for good players, and he has a track
Yeah.
record of getting them. So,
Right.
but on the flip side, the Badgers made 3 additions, but apparently they're going to have to make another addition because I think it was made officially official yesterday, but it's been sort of in the
Yeah.
work for a few days. Greg Scruggs is on his way to Michigan. Same role. Maybe he gets an assistant defensive coordinator title. Who knows? But he's going to be the defensive line coach at Michigan. Again, what does this mean to you, Max?
Well, he's going to get a raise.
Yeah.
He's going to go play for the defending national champion.
Yeah.
It's Michigan.
Yeah.
You know, this is the Big Ten and it's Michigan. There's still some cachet with that, right?
Yeah.
He has a relationship with Moore. Okay. What it means for the Badgers, I don't know. I'm kind of bummed because he seemed like he was doing a pretty good job and was a pretty good recruiter, especially with like the Viller pickup. And
He did.
you know,
He seemed like a plus
even
recruiter.
even in my little brief show prep, you know, there's one of the tackles that they're looking at. I'll talk about, like, their quotes are all having to do with Coach Scruggs, and there's a reason Michigan wanted him too. You know?
Yeah, I agree.
And I don't know. We've talked about position coaches. I think you even have on the title of that episode, or the
Yes,
working titles. We're still talking about assistants.
Still talking about assistant.
It goes so far, but I think that, I don't know. I mean, I think the problem now is that it might be hard to replace them in terms of where things are in the carousel. You know, you're already after the Super Bowl, the NFL staffs are all together.
Uh-huh.
You know, that I think is really going to put them behind the 8 ball, I think. And you know what? It happens. And you know, I mean, Moore was hired 2 weeks ago, or when it was made official?
Around that, yeah.
You
10
know,
days,
but
maybe?
that also had, you know, it was cascade from NFL stuff, which
Correct.
happens after college stuff. And I think it's going to be a challenge for Fickle to fill that spot with somebody who's of the same caliber as Scruggs appeared to be. And for me, though, again, it goes back to Max's, you know, number one rule of football: defensive linemen win championships. And I think they were, you know, with a guy like Scruggs in place, especially on the recruiting end. I mean, there's only so many Larry Johnsons out there, right? But that's the kind of person you need, and it seemed like Scruggs was on his way to that kind of, which is why Michigan wanted him. The one buffer that I do have to that, though, is the head coach himself is a defensive lineman and a defensive line coach, former, right? And what do you think of this is kind of a tangent, and it kind of goes off of the Scruggs conversation that we're having. But where do you think old Buckeye Coach Vrabel fits in for advice or assistance or something like that? Because it's something to talk about. I don't really think it means a hell of a lot, but it's another defensive guy.
Yeah.
That would probably have at least a little recruiting cachet to maybe keep a Viller, who's, you know, Viller could leave. You know what I mean? They could sign it next, you know, an NLI, but things together, potential transfers. Because I think the recruiting aspect of Scruggs I think that's important.
They do. So I mean, I think he's tricky, right? Because I think some of his appeal and some of what makes fans sort of so devastated about him is that he was a very highly visible assistant coach, especially on social media, because
Sure.
he made a point of letting you know when he did things. And he was fun. Like, in a kind of dramatic way. I mean, I still stand by Greg Scruggs is going to do something that's going to get him really in trouble online one day, just because he's a little fast and loose. And you're like, one day, like, it really works to his advantage until it doesn't, and it's going to be something terrible.
Yeah.
But like, I mean, I look at him and I say, you definitely get a sense that he was fully invested in recruiting. You definitely get the sense that he had an idea that he was going to really make these guys over as a defensive line. I don't know that we saw anything like radical in this past year where I go, wow, he's a great coach of defensive line, but I don't know if that's just a function of what he had to work with.
Yeah,
right?
or for me, it's just hard to tell. I mean, unless it's like numbers or watching the game where you see impact plays or something. I don't know. I mean,
But I feel like but I do feel like this year I watched guys like use Rodas. Like that's a guy that I think flatlined or declined because he couldn't do what he was being asked to do.
sure.
Right? Now,
Sure.
is that a function of a guy that's mismatched to a scheme or a coach who's not able to coach him up? Probably more the former than the latter. But like I don't feel like you can just sit there and scream Greg Scruggs was the second coming. I just don't think you can.
There's not enough evidence for that either in
No.
one season. No.
But I do think the guy can coach, and I think he's a good coach. And the way to think of it is in 3 seasons, he's gone from an assistant on the Jets to the defensive line coach at Michigan. The reality is
Michigan.
he was, the defending national champion, to your point. So he was scheduled to make $425 this year. Michigan's D-line coach last year made $625, so you have to imagine he's in that neighborhood.
That's a big old raise.
It's a big old raise, and people are raising, their hackles about Wisconsin not paying assistants. But there is one thing in here, is that they are still paying Jack Bicknell. That's what people are forgetting. True. He did not get fired. He is reassigned, and they are all those guys are on 2-year contracts. So he has a contract that pays him, I think it's, where's my number? $650 this year. So you have a guy right now who's getting paid not to coach.
Oh my goodness.
So you have 2 offensive line coaches.
Oh, geez. I didn't realize that.
Your assumption there is the reason they probably did that was not to fire the guy and then have to make a big balloon payment, right?
Sure.
They don't have to pay him for the whole year in one big check. It's, they can, he's on salary still, he's getting... he's getting a paycheck and they're doing withholding for Jack McNell still.
Right.
So you've got an extra coach that you're paying.
Would that be a situation where they could move McNell across the line of scrimmage?
Oh, no, I don't think that's happening.
No.
I just think it's an issue of you have an expense there that you have to, if you want to say, my point was more like if you're trying to say Wisconsin's being cheap about this, okay, fine. But I think you also have another consideration was they viewed the need to change the offensive line that significantly.
It's worth a sunk cost.
Exactly. So they had to know that there was potential for some of this to be an issue.
Yeah.
So he's going to have to do some digging. Like you said, the timing isn't great. It is February 14th. But they're not the only ones on the hunt because... You know what? Let's just use it to transition into Sam's question on Twitter, because I think it does tie into the Scruggs thing.
I think it does too, and some of the points we were going to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I've been on overload in a theoretically quiet part of the season. I feel like there are just things being thrown at me that I'm like, wow, in the world of college football, there's a lot going on. But Sam had this question. This is from last week, which we didn't get to, but I'm kind of glad we didn't because it really ties into the Scruggs thing as well. Sam asks, there is a growing sense and some evidence that some college coaches are fed up with the NIL and transfer situation. The new Packers defensive coordinator, Jeff Hafley, who used to be at BC, has said how he wants to coach football, and college is just not providing that for him, as there is recruiting and then more recruiting and NIL going on top of that. Do you think Fickell ever gets to that point and opts to leave college altogether? My sense is no, and you could argue he might be a great fit for this era because he is sort of bought into it and is willing to play the game. So let's deal with this in pieces because it kind of ties into the Scruggs thing. Number one, the coaching carousel calendar is crazy right now. Like it's altered. It's stretching like crazy because at Alabama, right? So you had a head coaching change. Nick Saban kind of surprises the world. I'm assuming he didn't give them much of a heads up on this.
Yeah,
thing.
I don't think he gave him. I think he gave him hardly any.
Yeah, I mean maybe they had a day.
Yeah, I know.
To sort of get their ducks in a row, but
yeah,
Alabama makes a coaching change. Players get a 30-day window. They hire what's his face, DeBoer from Washington, and he brings a good chunk of his staff. And then his offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb, and Scott Huff, his offensive line coach, 31 days or whatever it was into his tenure. So right outside the transfer window when guys could leave, then announce they're going to the Seahawks and they're leaving. So Alabama is now in the hunt for an offensive coordinator and offensive line coach in February, 30 days after you thought they were all settled in and done. So now you're going to have them stirring things up. I think Alabama has settled on a coordinator and it's sort of in the works, but it's being done. But they have to fill positions which open to positions, and the carousel continues. Now, Wisconsin loses a defensive line coach and stretches this thing out. And you start to get to the point where, like, teams are going to start spring practice really soon. Like, some of them start late February, right? First week of March, especially down south.
Heck, National Signing Day was just last week.
It feels like you might have teams losing coaches right before spring practice, which has happened sometimes, but it just feels like it's going to be more often.
Yeah.
And
I think so too.
And then you see these other crazy things that tie into this. Like, I feel like the Chip Kelly leaving UCLA thing really isn't getting talked. It is, but really isn't getting talked in my mind about how big a deal that is. In which I think this is where you and I have a difference of opinion. So I'm going to be interested to see what you think, because I feel like that's a big deal. I really do. I feel like it's a harbinger of things, because you have a guy. This isn't like, you're not poaching Sean Lewis from Kent State to be your offensive coordinator at Colorado. Like, that's one thing, like a G5 coach leaving, maybe like, they're like, like, I'm kind of stuck in the 7-5, 8-4 in the MAC, and that's not really going to do something for me. Like, that's not going to push me along the way. Hey, maybe I go to Colorado and raise my profile and yada, 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 and something works out there. But you got what the gamble was.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
But here you have Chip Kelly at UCLA, right? Which, when you and I were talking about the new Big Ten schedule back last year, you and I were arguing, like, what are the big draws? And we were sort of like equivocating on whether UCLA or Wisconsin is a bigger draw in the new Big Ten. Well, that question's been answered for me. Like, it's not even, my opinion of where UCLA is in the college football pecking order changed in 36 hours massively, because Ohio State went and poached their head coach to be their offensive coordinator. And UCLA then turns around and hires a position coach they hired Deshaun Foster. Like,
wow.
Like, they hired a position coach from the NFL. Like, not even like a big time position coach.
No, I didn't realize that.
And so he's brought in, I guess, theoretically, alum, provides stability, blah, 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 but nowhere near head coaching experience. He has some college coaching experience, but you're like, wow. I mean, it just blew me away. Like, it really blew me away that happened. And you're like, this is like, we're in new uncharted territory. And then you see like Chip Kelly is getting out of the head coaching game. Like, he doesn't want to be a head coach. That's clear to me. Hafley was like, I'm at BC. This isn't going to work. I'm jumping. I'm going to the NFL. And I do, like, you can say that was spin on him worried about job security, because he's at one of the weaker Power 5 to Power 4 jobs out there.
Yeah,
BC is one of the tougher ones, and it's not Wake Forest, but it's not much better.
It's about the same.
Yeah.
It's a little more high profile, and they've done things in the past, but it's 30 and 40 years ago.
Exactly. I mean, Doug Flutie is selling medications on Super Bowl, on Super Bowl ads,
Right.
So, yeah, exactly. And you're like, wow. And to me, it just feels like you take those two things, you take on top of that the Big Ten and SEC going to have a meeting about the future of college football, which is just power to. Like, here it comes. I don't care what.
I think that was pretty blatant.
Yeah. I mean, it's coming.
Right.
That this whole thing is like, it's just a little too much chaos right now. And it's like, like we're running the reactor at 115% and the submarine is shaking. That's all. If I can make a Hunt for Red October reference.
That's nice.
I don't know why I decided on that one, but like parts are flying off this
I
car.
like
It's
it,
like,
though.
can we
I like it.
slow down, like back off the throttle a little bit?
The analogy does fail a little bit because at least the car, if it's above ground, it can afford to lose some stuff and make running repairs. Whereas if you're in a sub and that happens and you're,
Fair
200
enough.
feet below, then you got a real problem.
We're at crush
Um,
depth, is what you're saying.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Which is to say, I don't think the Chip thing is as big a deal as you. I think,
Why?
and it's mainly is because of his personality. I mean, in his history, he's hard to work with.
Yeah.
He doesn't. Nobody wants him as a head coach anymore. I think UCLA's been on the down slope. Troy Aikman or Cade McNown. UCLA has had Jim Mora Jr., Carl Dorrell. And they've done
Mhm.
nothing. Like, when's the last time they were even competitive in the Pac-12 or the Pac-10, for that matter?
I get it. We have
You know,
like Bob
it's in
Toledo
LA.
bias because of our
It's
demographic.
that's another one. Yeah, but like, that's the last time they were good. I mean, they haven't been a relevant program in a long time. It's in LA. They play in the Rose Bowl. I get that, but they haven't been relevant. So how much you can take from that? I also thought it's kind of interesting to see, like, the UW Washington, or that Kalen DeBoer left and had him playing in a national championship. They're not even ranked in the top 25 preseason. Or like for people's too early top 25. Washington's even there.
Because their
I think
team
a lot of this
exploded.
stuff. It did. Well, yeah, no, I'm not saying it's unreasonable, but I think they're
Yeah.
going to come back to earth, so to speak. And for these new additions to the Big Ten, well, okay. I mean, Oregon and USC are third national brands that have staying power. I mean, Washington comes and goes. Before Sark, Washington was bad back to the Don James era when they were really, really good and a national power, but they ebb and flow. UCLA hasn't been anything like that for a long time. And the fact that Chip was there, I remember when Florida was looking for a new coach. I can't remember if it was after Muschamp, when Chip was a hot guy. And I remember my Florida friend being like, "Man, I wish they got Chip." And I'm like, "Dude, really? You sure about that?" And here, look, like, he took that job because it's semi-high profile. It's in the Pac-12. He had a lot of success recruiting in that footprint at Oregon, but done next to nothing over there. I think there's a little bit of, you're going to talk about it in a smaller picture. I think it's kind of fascinating that Bob he vacated the Ohio State coordinator position, which is interesting because Ryan Day's the play caller. He's been the play caller, right? That O'Brien went to Boston College for that head coaching job, and I think Bill O'Brien's one of those guys too. I think he's very similar. He's a better coordinator than a head coach.
Well, but here's the thing. All right.
I don't know. I just don't think there's that much to take from it. I think there is a lot to take from it. And you had tweeted something on the show account about a certain Badger who had turned down a lot of high profile jobs and is now a defensive backs coach
Mm-hmm.
at the Denver Broncos.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that tells you something too. It's like, do you want to deal with this college crap? Harbaugh, do you want to deal with this crap anymore?
Well,
But and just to anticipate you a little bit, to go back to Sam's question, I think he answered his own question. I think Fickle's the kind of guy who's
yeah, but so wait, before we get back to Sam's question, because I do think Fickle is just, he keeps saying you have to embrace. Like, he's going to ride this thing into the sun. Like, it's either going to get figured out or he's going to ride it into the sun. He's not a guy that's going to jump for the NFL. And to your point, Sam, yes, I think your hypothesis is valid that you're going to have a guy who's going to wrap his arms around it, I guess, for lack of a better term, versus kind of grumble about it. So yes, you want Luke Fickell. You don't want Chip Kelly. I would agree with that. Because I also think part of what this is it's the skill set that they need for this job is changing, and it's changing really fast.
Yes,
because
which I'll agree with that for sure.
They almost need to be a little bit like an athletic director, because what does an athletic director really do? They're judged on two things. The football, we're talking FBS level. The football coach they hire, because everything else you can screw up on. You really can.
As long as it doesn't wind up in litigation, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
And this ties into the second part. Do you bring money into the program?
Yeah.
That's really your job. Your job is to fundraise and to
Yeah.
hire a football coach. Now, football coaches need to figure out, sort of at arm's length, how to fundraise for their NIL stuff, but they can't really be involved with it at the same time. So they need
Mhm.
this infrastructure to develop around them, and they need to sort of figure out how to, like, it's like being a gondolier and you don't have a paddle, you have a pole, and you got to kind of just like push off things and keep yourself going down the canal. Like, they can't do it directly, so to speak. Very strange comparison I'm making, but I'm going to roll with that one, Max. But I would push back a little bit on your hypothesis, because
Mhm.
the Big Ten, one of the two monsters in the world of college football, decided to, distend their jaw and swallow a large chunk of the Pac 12 and digest it. And what part did they take? They took USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon.
Mhm.
Why was UCLA one of those programs they took? Because it's one of the biggest, it's the four biggest ones. They took the four best programs in the Pac 12, the four most valuable, let me use that term,
Sure.
programs. That's a better
No
term
doubt.
for it
Yeah,
in the
no doubt.
Pac 12.
No doubt.
And I think the fact that even though Chip Kelly is a weirdo, he's kind of in that Mike Leach category.
Yeah.
The fact that
Yeah.
he's like, I'm going to go
Yeah.
be an like Mike Leach was never going to be an offensive coordinator for somebody. Like, it kind of might have made sense. Like, if he was
Mhm.
around now, maybe he would, right? But I do think it's a bigger deal when a higher tier Power 5 job is losing, Power 4 job is losing its head coach to be the coordinator for a blue blood. Like, it's significant to me. And I think for all these coaches, like
Yeah.
the Hafley thing and the Kelly thing, and then like the Big Ten and SEC basically figuring out how to make themselves into the NFL, like, there's just a lot going on. It's making it very hard to sort of figure out where we're at. Like, with Scruggs leaving, like, to circle all the way back to that part,
Mhm. Yeah.
is it bad that they didn't spend a couple $100,000 more to keep him? I don't know at this point. I
Neither do
don't
I.
think it mattered.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think keeping Greg Scruggs around was going to make this team significantly better in the short term. Like, I think there's a
No.
lot of other parts to it that are sort of all circulating around it that you sort of have to account for. But man, it's chaos. Like, I think there's a lot going on that we don't
So
really understand what the impact of it's going to be yet. I guess would be my
yeah.
closing thought on it.
No, I agree with you on that. And when you just said the thing about Scruggs, it kind of put my head into a different direction, even though it's small. But I think you can maybe take more from it than you can from Chip Kelly, because I just think that's very personality driven. Is that okay? So what if Wisconsin did decide to spend money on trying to keep Scruggs? Okay, yeah, but does Michigan say, okay, fine, we'll pay more, and you have a bidding war over a position coach? How far off is
Yeah.
that?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure it happens. We just
Yeah, I
don't
think
hear
it
about
happens. I think it happens too. I think it happens too.
I mean, the way I would assume it, I mean, my assumption is Michigan came to Scruggs. Are you interested? Oh, yeah, I'm kind of curious, but, we got to make it
Came to
work.
his agent. Came to his agent.
Yeah. And they gave him a number, and then he turned around and said, hey, these guys approached me about leaving. And, Fickle, those guys either maybe they made an offer and then it got countered again, or maybe they just said we can't come up with
Yeah,
it.
I was gonna say. I guess we don't really know. Yeah,
But
which is maybe why it took so long for that to kind of drib out as a rumor and drib out as something like a unconfirmed or an unofficial rumor, or you know what I mean?
yeah.
Because you knew about it before I did, and I hadn't seen it at all. But I mean, it wasn't official for a little while either.
No, and it was definitely a
Maybe
little bit
you're
of
right.
back and forth.
But that's something too, though. Wouldn't you make an investment in somebody that you thought was going to bring in recruits that would bring in more NIL money? That, you know what I mean? Like, there's more financial at stake. I don't know.
Maybe.
I think that stuff is more the important thing. And I'm gonna go back to the conversation with the Auburn fan about the transfer portal and Satan Spawn. This stuff will all adjust and find its level again. But there is an element of mercenary is not the right word, but it's a difference between pro and college that's dissolving, and it really goes back to the whole. I hate to use this word, but I don't mean it in a political way, but it's like this neoliberal thing where everything is for sale and everything is transactional and all of success in the temporal world, which is the only thing that exists, is based on maximization of value and efficiency. And I think that's one of the things that your difference between the amateur and the pro, difference between college and NFL, a lot of that's being dissolved that way because it really is now. If you thought it wasn't about money before, I think you were naive, but the mask is off of that. And I think that is a conversation. I think that's what we're talking about. I think it's what Sam's talking.
Maybe. I
I don't
mean,
know. But no. I don't. I'm not talking about the way I just framed it, but I framed it that way. But I think I'm framing. That's the framing that I'm putting on the conversation.
yeah, no, I get it.
We're having. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think, and I don't disagree with you that it's like there is a rapidly changing economic landscape
Yeah.
in football, and they don't have. I mean, and people they've been pretty upfront about that. I mean, even the chancellor at
Sure.
Wisconsin, she's like,
Sure.
we don't. It's not about whether or not guys make money. It's like we don't really have any framework to make this thing logical and how it ties to the university and where it does. Like, not even it wasn't even making a value judgment on anything about it. She just said like we gotta get this thing. People smarter than me need to figure this out. I think was
Yeah.
to paraphrase what she said.
Yeah.
But I think with Scruggs, the only thing I would push back on is assistants have moved every 2 years as long as I've followed college football. Is Greg Scruggs going to Michigan because he's getting a raise? Yeah, that's part of it. Is Greg Scruggs going to Michigan because it's a high profile job? Yeah, that's part of it. Is Greg Scruggs going to Michigan because he, on average, is going to get better talent to work with that makes him look better? Yeah, that's part of it. Is Greg Scruggs an ambitious guy who probably wants to be a head coach somewhere at some level at some point? I think that's the majority of it because all of these guys,
Sure.
if you do this job,
Yeah.
right? Like, I mean, Fickle was talking the other day about like, oh, I gave them Friday off so that they get a day of rest. The coaching staff here and there. This profession required like the new guys are living in Airbnbs with their families across the country for 3 months. Like it's a lifestyle and you have to sacrifice a lot to be in it. And the only reason you do that is because you have that ambition. So I think that's the stuff that people have to remember. Like getting a Wisconsin guy or paying a guy another $50,000 isn't going to keep them, or $200,000. I don't really think is going to keep them around that long. Because what is their
No.
goal? There is an ambition to this job and to this level of the profession. So
I think what you just did though really kind of puts that's another way to frame this. And I think what people do need to remember, the whole thing that you just described, that he wants to be a head coach someday, and that's the majority of it, that hasn't changed.
yeah,
That's been that way since there has been college football. That's been that way since you came out of officer school in the 1850s in Prussia. That someday you want to be a general or no. But I don't think that part of it has changed.
yeah. All right. So
That was fun.
that was a long conversation.
Well, yeah, I know, but this is a lot of the stuff, especially in a non-playing portion of the season. This is
Yeah. So I guess we wrap it on that. We've gone on longer than we should have, but we're going to be away
longer than
next
we
week,
had.
as we mentioned last time. But we also have shifting schedules over the next 3 weeks. Is that a good way to sum it up? Because we've kept people a long time. You've got a lot of moving parts on your end. I've got moving parts on my end. May try to squeeze in another in the next 3 weeks. We're going to be a little bit quiet. That's all we're getting at. And it's not because we've run off and decided we don't want to do the pod anymore. We just have a few pieces working around. And we're going to try and squeeze some kind of show in there in the meantime. I think it's just the easiest way to sum it up. Do you think? But
Yeah, I agree.
just so you know, we're still out there.
I have travel.
If you're listening and you know what, you want a question answered on the show, we could do that. I bet you, just because our timing may not work out for the two of us to get together at the same time, but if we get enough from people, maybe you or maybe I could do a Q&A show straight off some listener questions, or maybe we'll squeeze in a guest. We'll figure something out. But we will be back, I guess is what we're saying.
And furthermore, the next time we will be back, when we are on the show together again, I spring practice should be set.
Yeah,
So if you're going to have questions, think about those,
indeed.
because we'll be talking about them in a month's time.
Yeah.
So,
So I think on that note, Max, until the next time.
Until the next time.
Enjoy the conversation? Head on over to buckaroundpodcast.com to find all the ways to connect with the show, links to our Patreon page, and feeds for every major podcasting platform. We want to thank each and every one of our patrons. You make this podcast possible. This has been the Buck Around, Badger football analysis from a fan perspective.
Background. There it is. There's Toner.
Nope. Toner.
Toner's
Old
made
Toner
an
showed up.
appearance. Good to see you, Toner.
All right. As usual, I cannot hear Toner. As
It's
usual.
perfect. Like right here. Right here we get Toner. I mean, it was coming. Oh, Cody will hopefully put this at the end. But you know what? He won't, because he thinks it's funny to leave this in as I'm talking over this thing. And like as he's editing this right now, he's giggling like a little this is a family show, I can't curse.
Toner
And
Bordellini.
there we go. Toner, are you good now? We're all stretched out. So
You were talking about the offensive line coach, so Toner decided to show up right then.
that's what it is.
There you go.